I need to start it. So whether or not I've got a camera, I gotta start it.
Time. So we'll call this meeting of the Water and Sewer Board for Tuesday, March 9th of 2021 to order. And at this time, I would like to get a voice approval of members present. And I'll give my name: Wiggins, Clyde, Chuck,
Mark Habeneck,
Mayor,
Linda Olson.
Mr. John Moore,
John Moore's here.
Mr. Don Roth. He was on here.
You're muted.
Is he muted?
He's still muted.
There it is.
All right. How about Drivis Ridley? She was on here.
I'm here. Travis Ridley's here.
Okay. Well, that's enough for quorum, so we'll call this.
I'm
meeting-
here too. Caitlin Mercer.
Oh, there's Caitlin. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you.
I'm unmuted now.
Okay, there we are.
John Roth.
We got a full board here. All right. First item is the approval of minutes for the Water Board meeting on February 9th. Do we have any corrections or additions or takeaway from it? If not, could I get a motion to accept the minutes from the February 9th meeting?
So moved.
So moved by Chuck, a second.
I'll second.
Okay, Caitlin, a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, go to Brenda here. Do we have anybody that wishes to speak at public forum?
I have no participants for public forum today.
All righty. Next item, number 5, new business. A, the discussion on informational versus action items for Water Sewer Board, and that'll be handled by Pieter, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Really what we wanted to bring forward with this item was, as we've been navigating the Water and Sewer Board over the last year and bringing different items to the board, we sometimes struggle with understanding whether something should be an action item or something should be informational, or whether we should bring it at all. And so we reached out to our city attorney's office. And so tonight we have Dugan Comer with the city attorney's office on as well to help support this discussion and basically correct me if I say anything that's wrong. Essentially what we did is we went back through and we looked at what established the Water Sewer Board, which is it's a board that's established through the charter. If you recall, late last year we were looking at the boards and commission handbook, and we were trying to blend the document of the board and the commission handbooks and the things that it was talking about with what the requirements of the charter were. And so we've gone back through and we've done an analysis of this, and Water and Sewer Board was one of the 5 boards established in the 1950s. Requires the mayor and 2 council members to sit on it, as well as the other board members. And really it's got a pretty narrow focus as it relates to what are actual action items versus informational items. And so according to the charter and municipal code language, action items are things like water rights, which would be acquisitions, agreements for sale, or other systems, much like what we do with Centennial Water and Sanitation District. That's a leasing option of our water rights, or land acquisition, easements, and right-of-way. So the work we do with the city ditch, if we've got crossings, if we've got water and sewer lines where we need to put pipelines and have easements associated with those. And so I think if you think about some of the things that we brought in the last year that are associated with real property, essentially. As it relates to things that we know that we have coming up that we would see as action items as it relates to the Water and Sewer Board, we have a communication crossing from MCI that will require a temporary construction permit and an easement. There's some work being done down in C470 and where the city ditch it runs in that area. And so as they're realigning the ditch, that's something we will bring to Water and Sewer Board, as well as some of the other easement acquisition work that may be required as part of the pump station work. So then you get to the informational items, and really that's where it becomes a much more a less defined set of items, and it really comes down to staff discretion to some degree. So what we've done over the last year is we've focused on our more larger, complex and high profile projects, our rates and fees, our master plan work, the pump station work, those large contracts, to bring them to the Water and Sewer Board. And what we have done along the way is we had made that an action item to move for a recommendation for approval by council. And in researching this, we've determined that's actually not something that we would do, because it doesn't fall into that real property or water rights scope of the board. And so moving forward, our plan is to continue to bring those items so that we get the feedback from the board as it relates to rates and fees and the any construction work or large construction projects. You'll see that we've got another couple items tonight that we want to bring as informational items to the board, and then not necessarily make them action items, but make them informational items. And so that's really what we've been able to distill it down to. And Dugan or Brenda, please chime in if I left anything out, or if there's anything that I misrepresented in terms of how I described it. Or did I get that right?
Sounds good to me.
You got it right.
Okay, so with that, I really just was looking for some feedback from the board as it relates to how that sounds in terms of an approach moving forward, as it relates to probably more than anything, the discretion items, and as well, are there other discretionary items that you would like us to bring or update the board on a more regular basis on?
Well, I'll open it up for anybody on the board that would like to speak to the issue. Chuck, do you have any comments on it?
Nothing specific, no.
How about you, Don?
Nothing here.
How about you, John?
So it strikes me that if I'm following this correctly, what changes is we've done things in the past that provide council the knowledge of whether or not the board recommends something. We don't have the authority to make that decision, but it's just the recommendation. So it seems to me that while obviously in those cases, council's the one that had the authority, we've been acting historically in a way that was, call it advisory to council in that sense. And so it seems like the change being proposed removes that action. So if I'm reading that correct, then my question is just whether or not council would have continued to value the board, speaking up in that manner or not. So from what you've described, Peter, I don't think this is much, it isn't what's in the board. I think we've already, the way these things were set up, it sounds like it was already established that it was outside the board's direct purview. So I'm assuming that somewhere historically, it was something that was beneficial to council. That's just how I would interpret what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, and I think, as I've worked in other organizations, the Utilities Commission or the Water and Sewer Board or whatever, the advisory board does exactly that. It's more of an advisory. It's a concurrence that the direction that is being proposed to council is one that's supported by the more specific, technically focused board on water and sewer. I think where we were struggling was we would bring something up and we would say, is this an action item or is it not an action item? Not realizing what the appropriate category it was. And so I think that's why we dug into this, because we just want to make sure we're doing it according to charter. Now, if there's a process by which we I don't know if we ask for general consensus to say that the Water and Sewer Board through consensus agrees that this is a good approach, and then that becomes part of the packet to the city council to indicate to the council that there is support. Maybe that's a way. I'm probably somewhat outside my my legal range in this, and I'd probably defer to Dugan to maybe chime in a little bit on that.
Well, can you hear me?
Yep,
We can.
hear you.
Okay, good. Well, yesterday my microphone was messed up and today it's working. So the Water and Sewer Board is really focused on, as Pete said, water rights and acquiring those water rights, protecting those water rights. And one of the sections of the code is Chapter 3 of Title 12, which are the city ditch regulations. And that's where the Water and Sewer Board will actually look at, say, a temporary construction license if there's a project that's going to impact the city ditch. And we would draft a temporary construction license, and then that would be brought before the board to be reviewed. And the recommendation of the board would then be forwarded to council for approval. The other item that a lot of times goes along with that is if the project requires the ditch to be moved, then we draft an easement agreement where we vacate the first easement, the original easement that the ditch is in, and the developer grants us a new easement. And that goes before the board for approval and recommendation to council. And that actually goes to council by ordinance. So we take those two items, the temporary construction license and the ordinance moving the ditch, to council for their approval. So those are the two big action items that the board typically acts on. And with the temporary construction license, the board chair usually signs off on that. And then on the easement, when it's being actually physically moved, then the mayor and the director will sign off on the easement as well as the ordinance. And then we record all of that with the county so that we have a legal record of it. As for the other items like contracts for, construction that the water plant may be doing or the sewer plant might be doing, those are not necessarily action items. Those are just informational items, as Pieter said. If staff decides that they want the board to see what's going on. But you're not making a recommendation as to whether to approve those or have council approve those. Does that help?
Yeah, Dugan, I think that's helpful in that even in our most formal actions, our explicit responsibilities are nothing, I'll say nothing more than recommendations to council. And that helps draw the distinction I thought I was hearing. So as opposed to by us making recommendations on things that are not within our purview, it creates somewhat of confusion with the things that are specifically within our purview.
Correct.
Okay.
And I think staff can bring those to you and just say, we need a recommendation to council from you with regard to this item. And then the other one would be, we're just bringing this as an informational item. We're not requesting a recommendation.
I think, as we think about this, one of the I think maybe I mistakenly approached rates and fees last year a little bit differently than what the charter had said. And I think we got really good discussion from this board on that. And I think that was helpful for the discussion with council. So I don't know if it's something that I appreciate understanding the board's sentiment on a number of these items, including, more specifically anything rates and fees, to ensure that what we're recommending is in line with what this board what this board thinks is a good approach. And so if it's not an action item, would there be a way to achieve general consensus, Dugan, or is there another, or board member Moore, go ahead.
Well, if I may ask it this way, is there anything, Dugan, is there anything that stops the board from making a motion to make a recommendation? I mean, are we free to speak and do that if we wanted to? And maybe we make those motions clear that while they're not in our purview, the board is still doing that. I mean, I do remember those rate discussions, and I believe Mayor Olson in particular was very much interested in getting the board's opinions out there. So I'm wondering, perhaps, I'm not sure I like consensus in that it's so informal. If the board wishes to express an opinion, can it simply choose to take its own action? Even if maybe we make it clear that it's not one of our formal charges.
There's nothing in the code or the charter that directs the board to sign off on contract or something of that nature. There's nothing in the code that prevents that either. And I think information given to the board is a good thing. It provides transparency. It's one step. But the board doesn't have the authority to say, we don't think this contract should go through. That's not something the board can do. The board should say, yes, we've seen the contract, but I'm not comfortable with saying that you could say we shouldn't approve this contract. I think that's ultimately the decision of the council, because the council passes a budget, you looked at a budget, things of that nature.
So
Chair, a second. I think we just lost Caitlin, and then I saw her hand up. But if there's somebody letting her in, I don't know if she's in now or not. Just a technical thing. Sorry, I was just noticing, but now I think she might be gone altogether. Sorry, go ahead.
Well,
Good, John.
let's give it, if it is just a second to get her back on, let's wait for her to be able to join.
She was in the window to join and now she's not. You can send her a quick email.
All right, I'll go ahead and speak then. Dugan, I'm a little, in what you said, I'm still thrown by there being any restrictions on the board expressing its opinion. So is it inappropriate for the board to make make a motion and pass its opinion on to council for their consideration? I don't see how that is inappropriate. So
Nor
I don't
do I. Nor do
really
I.
for you right now. I'll be honest. I think I don't see it as a bad thing either. I'm not saying that it's something you shouldn't do. We just have to be careful about how the board is looking at non-action items. And I'm talking about, agreements that maybe the water plant is buying chemicals. I mean, you could bring that, staff could bring that to you. You could say, yes, we've seen it. We're fine with buying these chemicals, as an example. Or we're fine with expanding the plant, the water plant. But I think in the end, I don't see anything in the code that gives the water board necessarily the authority to say we oppose this completely. It shouldn't go forward. Or on the other hand, I don't see it saying you can't do that.
right. If the board, I have two angles on this. As a board member, this board may have opinions it wishes to express, particularly when it gets to rate increases or things like that. And I think from the board side, I hate to diminish the role of the board and it diminish its advisory capabilities. And I also speak from a council member standpoint from the past that there's still there's something reassuring when a council member is making their decision to know what this board is thinking. And I think the idea of just doing consensus runs the risk of miscommunication. The idea of saying the board approved the following statement adds clarity. I do think it would be very useful in the future that it is clear if the board were to do something like that, that the motion or whatever that we'd be passing on is just, it's clear that it is just us speaking our mind as opposed to carrying out an explicit duty. But I still just think this board has a long history of the way things have been operating, that we've been knowingly or not in this advisory capacity. And I'm not sure I see the value of diminishing that. I think we just be more clear about when we're speaking opinion as opposed to carrying out a duty.
And maybe a thought on that is that with every item that comes through on an informational, most of the informational items, like what you'll see tonight, it truly is informational. It's an update of what's happening relative to some of our projects and initiatives. If it is something more along the lines of rates and fees, allowing for the option for someone to make a motion for a recommendation of approval or recommendation of support or something like that. And if there's a second, then it carries through. But if it doesn't, then it dies in the moment. But I think if we leave it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if we leave that option open in those informational items, then it can be the discretion of the board at that point in time as to whether you want to or not.
To me, that sounds like the right answer, but
Yeah. How about you, Mayor? I'm just kind of curious. Don't you feel that you are interested in getting the opinion of the board on a lot of matters?
Absolutely. And when we've been a little bit shy from that, I've pushed you along, so
Yeah.
I don't know what members Anderson and Wink think, but I don't know why we would have you around otherwise. Because,
Right, exactly. We're an advisory board, and so that would be it. I go along with John on that. So does that give you some direction, Pieter?
That's actually perfect. And again, we wanted to make sure that we are clearly following what the charter said, but also making sure that we got what you wanted from a board perspective, because our job here is to present to you and follow through on the actions that you want to see us move forward with.
I apologize for not getting back to Drivis there to see if she had any comment on the thing. Did you, Drivis, have any comments you wanted to make on it?
Actually, I really liked what John had to say. It almost seems as if the board is irrelevant if we don't have input.
Is Caitlin back around yet or not? I guess she hasn't returned. So.
I am. I am. Yeah, sorry, a lot of technical difficulties. But I agree with what John brought up. Yeah.
Okay.
Chair, can I weigh in here real quick?
Is that Joe?
Yeah.
Go to it.
I'm just wondering if it might be from council side. I really do want to hear recommendations, even on stuff that's not particularly required of that in charter or ordinance, just like the mayor was saying. I wonder if it wouldn't be worth, if we couldn't bolster the ordinance to actually ask for that expectation, or at least look into that. I don't know, Dugan, is there anything in charter preventing us from modifying the ordinance related to water and sewer board to ask for or to bolster the requirements from the water and sewer board in that way? Because having it be just an option that they can do, I think is maybe not strong enough. I'd have to think through it a little bit more, but I'm wondering if we could bolster the board's meaning and purpose of existence.
Absolutely, we can certainly change we can add something to the ordinance to allow for that. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just telling you what I've found in my research. I don't disagree with Member Moore. I think it's important that council hear from the board. I'm just throwing a few, throwing my little monkey wrenches out there, but absolutely we can certainly address that through a change in the ordinance. There's nothing preventing that.
Along those lines, I was going to ask, since council would like to hear from the board members, and we are maybe the sounding board for the public. I don't know if they go directly to council, but could they have our names? I have no objections to my name and phone number being used. If somebody wants to call up and have at me or make a comment about a particular issue that pertains to us, how does the other board members feel about being available for receiving comments from the general public of the city?
I can have my phone number forwarded to you, Chair Wiggins.
Well, that's no problem at all. I can get hold of you if I want to. I'm sure I can find you with no problem there. But I'm just saying that I have no problems if some general public wants to talk to me about an issue that we could then discuss when you guys or the city, Pieter and his crew bring up an issue to us, that we'd give a comment to the city council so that you could make a decision on which way to go. We'd be a pre-sounding board before they get to you, save a little flack on you, or at least tell you what we're hearing. I'm not hearing anything, generally speaking, anybody calling at all. And my phone number's out there, I know.
Rates are the biggest deal, but do you mind if I say something?
No,
actually much more helpful, or a question. I have a couple questions actually. I'm trying to think of, so Dugan, you've been looking through things and that's how this came about, right? It's just that you've been doing exploration but
yeah, I mean, I've been asked by Pieter and staff to look into this a little bit. Yes.
So we've been doing this for a long time. Like, I mean, since I've been on in 2009 anyway. And
right.
Remember more, I mean, we had some pretty deep conversations about a number of things during that time. And some of you have gone back way, way longer than that. So I do think that councils expect us to be having pretty rigorous conversations and coming forward with what we think. It's like, I mean, it's not like planning and zoning board, but it's similar in that we can turn down whatever you suggest, but it's just so helpful to have your perspective and to say, this is what this is what we think. But this board also can it can make decisions on cases as well and send it to the courts. So it does have some function, but we haven't done that in a long time.
No, that's true.
The board has an appeal function.
Yeah.
People who are, challenging a bill, a sewer bill or a water bill. I don't know the last time any of that ever happened, honestly.
I think it was a city ditch thing, wasn't it? It was a house. I don't remember. It was something.
No, there was a house. I think the corner of the roof was in the right of way, and we had to go to court on a quiet title action. And we settled that. And the board obviously was definitely involved in something like that. And as I listened to the discussion here tonight, I'm changing my tune a little bit. I don't see any real problems with the board putting forth their recommendations to council. I think it's important. It's very similar to what planning and zoning does. When somebody comes into planning and zoning and wants a street vacated, they have a public hearing, and it's a little more involved, but they have a public hearing and they make a recommendation to council because it comes to council for the ultimate decision. So as I listen to the conversation tonight, I think I have to agree with Member Moore that I think I see a role here for this board in making recommendations to council, and it has in the past, and I don't see why it shouldn't in the future. And I don't think we necessarily need to do an ordinance change, but we certainly can do that if that's something that everyone wants to do.
Well, it sounds like it. Let's go with it.
Well, if we don't need to, because it already allows for this, I'd rather not waste time of everybody to do that. It'll just make everybody nervous. But if we don't have the right to do this and it needs to be clearer, then yes. But I mean we've made all kinds of decisions that have gone to council.
Yeah, I guess if we back up to what caused this whole investigation to begin with is we're just trying to make sure we're bringing the right things and making the right actions. And what we found was there's a really narrow scope in the actual charter, and that's the water rights and the property thing. But I think beyond that, I agree, and much like what we did through the whole rates and fees process, it helps us when we bring it to council. And maybe a way to do this is we work with Chairman Wiggins on the few days before on the agenda. And so maybe it's much like what Mayor, you do with the council agenda setting, is maybe at that point in time we say, here are the items we're going to bring up. Here are the ones that are absolutely required by charter that we have to do an action item. Here's our recommendations that we'd be looking for some kind of a motion from the board for recommendation to council. And then here are the ones that are informational, but also give the opportunity for Chair Wiggins to say, no, I think we should make that an action item as well for a recommendation. And so maybe that's the process there. And it's more just defining that, I think, is as much as anything.
Well, let's go forward with that then, Peter.
Could I add another thing or a question into that then, Chair Wiggins? Could I add another thing in or ask another thing? So in the past, and John will remember this, we did the conservation plan. We worked on that and then came up with and voted on it and then submitted to council to confirm. We also had quite a conversation several different times about water meters and what the policy would be there. Are those things we shouldn't have been doing, or are they covered in this as well? Because I mean, I remember the meter conversation, because I've always been frustrated that we haven't really followed through and made it mandatory and made it through the whole city. But we didn't have any teeth. I mean,
I guess the answer, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe Dugan, maybe you can. It doesn't sound like it was necessarily not allowed, but it wasn't explicitly accounted for. Maybe that's the way. And so it just became a matter of practice. And as new people in utilities here, part of what we're trying to do is just sort through everything to make sure that we're following what the rules and the charter and the regulations show.
Sure, that makes sense.
That's just
I see there's a couple of hands up too.
Somebody else have questions?
I've got a comment, but I'll let Joe go first.
Okay, yeah, I was just gonna say, Peter, from my perspective, I would love to see anything that council is going to make a decision on related to the water treatment plant or the sewer treatment plant, or anything that's within the purview of the water and sewer board should be that council is going to make a decision on. I would love to have a recommendation on that. I would like it a little bit more strongly than just having the option. I would like to see a recommendation on all that. And in fact, like with a rate study, many of the conversation from the water and sewer board was tremendously helpful, and I think saved council a lot of time and discussion when it came time to make a decision on that, because we knew that that everyone here was putting the time and effort into bringing a really good recommendation to council. So I would like to see a recommendation from this board on anything. If that doesn't require an ordinance change, then I'm fine with that. But just in terms of how you operate with Chair Wiggins, it would be my preference to ask for a recommendation from the board on anything, even if it's typically outside of the purview of what the board is explicitly given authority in the ordinance and the charter.
Thank you, Joe. Okay. John?
3 comments. One, yeah, I don't think we need to do this by ordinance. 2, this board has a long established history of operating this way, and it's clear that nothing's binding us from it. I got 4 things. 3, Peter, I do think this is a very valuable exercise, so please don't take my comments to be anything other than that. I think this is actually very helpful for us. Then the 4th thing I just want to add is kind of tying, I think, to what Mayor Olson mentioned, or my own comment. I'm a little perplexed why in all the years I've been on the board with prior staff, there was very specific times where we said, hey guys, or that we were told, here's something we want to share with you. It really is informational, but here is something else we need you to act on. And we're saying that decision framework was incorrect all those years. At the end of the day, I don't care, I don't think, because I think every one of those conversations being very uniform in the sense that this board has a long history of practicing in a certain manner. And we can and should continue to operate that way. So whatever the confusion's been in the past, I don't understand, but we will continue to do this function. And bluntly, yeah, this board is worthless if we're not going to serve that. Not worthless, but it isn't worth this many people's efforts this often if we're not going to continue to contribute in that manner.
Well said, John. Well said. All right, Peter, you got direction there?
I believe the mayor still has her hand up. Okay. Yeah, that's extremely helpful, and that gives us the clarity that we were actually looking for. And thank you for engaging in the conversation. That really does help us a lot in terms of making sure that we are following what the board is looking for and what the council is looking for.
Thank you, sir. Next item B is the 2021 bulk chemical purchases, and I guess Angela has handled that.
Yeah.
Presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and council members and Water and Sewer Board members. So I think this is probably a great segue into from the discussion that we just had, where I thought I would give just a brief synopsis of the chemicals that we use here at the Allen plant, and then give folks a heads up for some things that will be coming to council. So we have 4 main chemicals that we use here at the water treatment plant. We have aluminum sulfate, sodium hypochlorite, sodium hydroxide, and sodium permanganate. So aluminum sulfate is the main coagulant that's used for water treatment. That is a flocculant, and that is the first step in the water treatment process. The sodium hypochlorite is used for disinfection. The sodium hydroxide is caustic, that is used for pH adjustment. And then the sodium permanganate is one of the more, I guess, minor chemicals that we use, and that's used for taste and odor control. So we came to, I think, both the Water and Sewer Board and Council last year with a change order for sodium hypochlorite. And we tried really hard this year to get a very good handle on what the quantity of chemicals is that we need for the entire year. So we tried really hard to take a look at the last several years for coming up with a better average for the quantity of chemicals that we use, and then breaking that down into a seasonal or month-by-month basis. And then we looked really hard at what we've been tracking so far this year, trying to get those purchase orders. So because of the amounts required for sodium hypochlorite, and then for aluminum sulfate, those we would actually be going to council for. And then the caustic actually puts another chemical over, because it's the same manufacturer, if that makes sense. And so that is just a little bit of a summary for what we use those for, and just our goal in trying to keep the water plant running and keep the water coming out of the treatment plant safe.
So you make a purchase for how long?
Excuse me?
For how long into the future do you make a purchase?
So we are getting for the remainder of the year.
Right.
And there is, and I will not be able to explain what the acronym for MAPO is, but there is this magical MAPO list that all different Colorado agencies and cities and districts can get on in order to get really good pricing from local vendors. And that's key whenever there's a big snowstorm like there is coming up, to be able to get chemical deliveries and not have to worry about snow in Kansas or floods in Texas, that kind of thing. And so we are, our intent is to get on the MAPO list for next year so that we have the guaranteed prices and the manufacturers know the quantities that we need, which also helps them planning their deliveries and production of chemicals.
Somebody else have a question?
Yeah, well, I was just going to add one more clarification on this, and this is something that we've been working through over the last probably year and a half. I would say somewhat throughout the city as it relates to bulk chemical purchases. So the way bulk chemical purchases used to work was a PO would be set up, and there'd be a delivery for a certain amount of chemical, and then that would get paid. And what happened was there was a cumulative amount of that occurring throughout the course of the year, because you've got basically a water plant that needs so much chemical every year. And by the end of the year, we were exceeding the purchasing authority of the city manager, which would essentially cause it to trigger into a council approval. And so the system we are working to get set up, we're a little bit later this year, but we're still set up in time, is to ensure that we say this is our anticipated amount that we estimate the PO to be. And some of those are going to be in excess of $100,000. And that's what we bring to council, is basically a consensus and approval that yes, that PO amount is what we should move forward with, even though it's individual purchases and they accumulate. And then if we get to the end of the year and we look like we're going to exceed that amount, we'd bring it back to council. So it's not like a typical purchase where you've got a $150,000 project and you're just buying it, because we haven't actually made the purchase yet. All we're doing is setting up what we estimate the PO amount to be for the rest of the year, to ensure again that we're not cumulatively getting to a point where we then get into an exceedance of that $100,000 and haven't asked for council prior approval to making that kind of purchase. So it's a nuance of the purchasing policy that we are trying to ensure that we get in place in a way that ensures the appropriate level of purchasing authority.
Just don't get caught short.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that I want to get a clarification, because I believe I misspoke on the chemicals, and it's good that Dugan is on this call. It's actually resolutions that we're going to be bringing for the chemicals. So the vendor for aluminum sulfate is actually Chemtrade, and that dollar threshold would exceed $100,000. So we're bringing that forth in terms of a resolution. And then because sodium hypochlorite and sodium hydroxide is from the same manufacturer, which is DPC, we're actually bringing both of those forward in a resolution as well, since the total amount of that to that particular manufacturer would exceed $100,000.
Okay. Anybody else have any comment on bulk purchases here? Can't go to Costco or Sam's Club. You got to go with these. Okay.
I have a quick question. By setting up with the MAPO, does that help you save money by setting up the bulk purchases? Or
it's ironically not really, because we've been getting pretty close to MAPO prices, but it's more of a guaranteed price. So
okay.
we're able to do the thing where we tell the manufacturer, several months in advance, here's the quantity that we want for next year. And then they'll say, okay, here's, based on what you need, based on what Littleton needs, or Aurora Water or Denver Water or whoever else is on the list, they're actually able to offer better prices to everyone. And then it's a guaranteed pricing, and then a guaranteed quantity. But the prices that we've been getting, because we're actually using folks that are on the MAPO list, is close. So we will be saving a little bit of money, but not significant amounts, unfortunately.
Okay.
It creates price stability more than anything.
Correct.
All right. Next item C is the Harvard Gulch. Utility Director, Mr. Steve Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Can everyone see my screen okay?
We can.
All right, excellent. So this is an informational item on a new shareholder connection to City Ditch. So this was actually requested by Denver Water on behalf of the City and County of Denver for the purposes of irrigating the Harvard Gulch golf course and park. We're required to comply with this request based on a previously executed agreement in 1995 and subsequent amendment in 2001. Under this arrangement, City and County of Denver will pay Denver Water for the actual water because we don't own the water, we just own the ditch. And the City and County of Denver will reimburse us for our annual O&M costs based on their prorated share of water usage. One of the interesting aspects of this project is that it is beyond the existing termination point of the ditch. So this red line here shows the active portion of City Ditch. Currently, there is basically a manhole structure here that diverts all of the water that's not used by the shareholders back into Harvard Gulch. And so this new turnout is going to be downstream from that. So we're going to reactivate about 150 feet or so of pipe that's already in the ground, but historically hasn't been used. And so the project will activate that reach. It will involve a new turnout to City Ditch with a control valve to the City and County of Denver's reach. So we will take over ownership of that new portion, and the City and County of Denver will take over ownership over all of the downstream reach. We were provided all of the design drawings, and so we reviewed those, provided some comments. Those comments were incorporated, so they are being constructed in compliance with Englewood standards, and we'll be out on site during construction to inspect that. The volume of water to be delivered is about 1.25 CFS. So that's going to increase our shareholder volume from 3.4, where it's at currently, to 4.6. Again, City and County of Denver will be charged their prorated portion of our annual O&M costs. So there is a financial benefit to us to having an additional shareholder on the ditch. All that water is going to be delivered via this new infrastructure into the pond, which is dry at the moment, but during irrigation season would be full. Anything that's unused would then just flow back into Harvard Gulch. Construction is actually scheduled for within the next couple of weeks in order to get it in service before April 1st, when we'll be starting up the ditch. And again, when that construction happens, we will have city staff out on site to inspect and make sure it's in compliance with city standards.
Anybody have any questions? Thank you, Steve. Nice job.
You're welcome.
Next item D is Customer Assistance Program, the CAP. And
Chairman, it looked like Councilmember Anderson had a question.
I think, okay. Joe?
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mr. Simon, thanks for this presentation. So the water is coming from Denver Water, or they're providing the water? What's the source of the water? Is it from Chatfield or?
Yeah, exactly. So if I can divert your attention here to the gray map, the water is physically coming from Chatfield, and this black dashed line is the alignment of the City Ditch to this point of diversion, which is about 3 miles north of the city. So the water is physically coming from Chatfield. The water right is Denver Water's right.
So east or water be diverted?
I'm sorry, Member Anderson, I didn't catch the first part of that question.
Oh, sorry. So are they going to be releasing more water from Chatfield or into the City Ditch, or is just less water going to end up being diverted there?
The first, we'll be diverting more water out of Chatfield.
Okay. So that'll increase the overall flow typically in the City Ditch. Do you know the overall capacity? Like how much can the City Ditch handle?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because that's something we're going to be testing at startup. There's been changes to the ditch over time, some of which has been piped. Historically, it was all an open channel, and it was I don't know the capacity ultimately, but there were many downstream users beyond to the ultimate endpoint, which was Washington Park. And so we have no concerns that this additional shareholder is going to exceed our capacity, but we do want to confirm what our capacity is. So when we do the startup, we're going to run some tests to see what our hydraulic capacity is. And really the restrictions right now, since we have some remaining open channel portions, is overtopping the ditch.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Very interesting.
Yeah, if I could just add 2 comments to that. One is the interesting thing about the city ditch is the city of Englewood owns the ditch. The water that's predominantly run through the city ditch is Denver water rights. And so we have an agreement with Denver Water for some of that water, which is what we use, but the predominance of the water is Denver Water. Why that arrangement was set up so many years ago where Englewood owns the ditch and Denver has the water, I'm not exactly sure, but that's the nuance to the city ditch. Additionally, as we've been looking, ways to improve the water taste and odor and things like that, we are looking at ways to better utilize the city ditch because if we get water from near Chatfield, it's generally better source water quality than if we get it at Union Ave pump station. Right. And so we're working with our water rights engineers right now to potentially do a shift that's never been done in Englewood to get the predominance of that water closer to Chatfield, which should improve the source water, which ideally it's one simple incremental step that we're taking as it relates to trying to address what, I routinely see on Nextdoor is the strings that come up every few days about how bad Englewood water is. And we think that there are some operational changes that we can make without, we think there's also investment that needs to be done in some treatment process, but we think more immediately there's some operational changes that we can potentially make that could have a positive benefit. And that's just one of them.
All righty. Well, we're back to item D, Customer Assistance Program.
Okay, that is me, and I'm gonna do my best to share my screen here, and let me make sure I got the right thing. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Just about. There we are. We're on.
Okay, so we have, I think we have Carol Molesky and Siwan Rao with Stantec. I know you've seen them many times over the last year as they've helped us along the way with our rates and fees and several of these programs. And so really we've got 3 items and they're in successive order on the agenda. The first of which is an update on the customer assistance program. So we've been working on that to get it rolled out by the time that the rate increases hit and the first bills are hitting our customers in the general late May, early June timeframe. And so that's what we're going to walk through, where we're at on that and what our plan is. So let me, all right, let me get on the right page here. Okay, so these are the 3 things that we're going to address tonight. We'll do the first one, which is the cap. And so if you remember, these were the eligibility, the elements that we talked about, which was eligibility, assistance level, funding source, administration, and application. What we gained from consensus with the council through a study session was to target 250% of the federal poverty level, an assistance that's $180 a year, which is equivalent to the water CIF. That's that capital investment fee that we created at $15 a month. And so to tie a direct link between the customer assistance program and that new fee, since that's the bulk of the increase. The funding source for any amount of this program would be predominantly general fund. There was a desire to work this in partnership with Arapahoe County as opposed to setting up our own in-house program. And we're working on an application process, at which point through our discussions with Arapahoe County, we've looking to mirror those. And so essentially what we've found is Arapahoe County is really, really busy with a bunch of COVID stuff right now in terms of they're getting all kinds of money from the federal government, and they're figuring out ways to get that money out to people in need. And so when we talked to them about, hey, we'd like to start up a new CAP program for the city of Englewood, I think they were a little nervous about that, and did not see that they had the capacity right now to do that. However, what we did find out is that a lot of this is already in place at Arapahoe County, and for the more immediate term, as we roll out these the new rates and fees and the new bills come, we're gonna parallel that with a good campaign to link our residents to the available funding programs that are already in place in Arapahoe County. And so if we look at what some of the stuff that's being distributed or funds distributed by Arapahoe County, there's a rent and they do a lot of work with rent and utility assistance. It's predominantly focused on rent in terms of its usage. People typically look at it as rent assistance, when in actuality it's rent and utility. And so I think there's an opportunity to help more of our community in need realize that there is available funding there. They have received $9.8 million from the federal government so far for the emergency rent assistance program, which includes utilities assistance. So this handles the renter portion of our population as a currently in place program that our citizens in need can access. There's also CDBG and CSBG block grants, and those are the programs that are able to help the homeowners in our district. And so that has much more limited funding. However, what we've talked to them about is based on usage rate. Is there a way that if we use the entire CDBG block grant funding amount, and there needs to be some amount of supplement to help prevent the fund from running out of money if there's a significant amount of Englewood customers that are accessing it, that there might be some kind of a partnership with Arapahoe County to help backstop that. Essentially, what we found out about this is where we had originally thought that much of this funding for this program was going to come from the general fund or volunteer contributions. In reality, there's a significant amount of already available funds that come through these three sources that could substantially lower the impact overall on the general fund. And so that's why for this near term, that's what we're looking to do is get people readily connected to those programs so that they can qualify through the Arapahoe County programs.
Smart move.
So far these are the criteria. So for the emergency rent assistance, it is predominantly COVID impact. We were told by the Arapahoe County people, it is mostly everybody who seeks this kind of assistance can show a nexus to a COVID impact, and so it's readily available. And like I said, they've got more money than I think they have capacity to spend right now. And so really, the more we can get people connected to that from a rent assistance and utility assistance standpoint, I think there's a lot of people that may be suffering that may not realize that there's resources there that they could access today. For the CDBG and CSBG, there's both COVID and a non-COVID criteria for that. You can see the eligibility group, the funding levels amount that we talked about, and then the income requirements is 80% of the area median income, which is and then the CDBG is 80% of AMI, and then 200% of federal poverty level, which normally runs at 125%. Because of COVID, they've bumped it to 200%. So it's kind of a blend. It doesn't absolutely hit that 250% number, but based on 80% of area medium income, and Carol, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's generally slightly higher than 250 or is near 250. And the 200% on the CDBG and CSBG really targeted where we had originally talked, which was that 200% of federal poverty income for right now.
And Peter, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that should read area median. So the median income.
Again, oh, sorry.
And that is a little bit higher than 200% of the federal poverty level.
Okay, and so that's how we, in working in partnership with Arapahoe County, that's how we felt that was the most efficient way to to not recreate the wheel and get people access to assistance through what programs are already set up. And so that's going to require a tremendous amount of outreach. Our goal is that from that outreach process and from people seeing changes in their bills and contacting the utilities department and us getting them connected, that we'll have a better understanding of the usage rate of this type of program, because Arapahoe County has said that they will provide us usage data as it relates to people who are actually accessing it. And so as we develop an understanding of participation levels and costs, in parallel, we think that in talking to Arapahoe County, they thought that actually an in-house program managed by the city might be actually a more effective program because of the community. Residents of the city often will go to the city before they think of going to the county for this type of support. And what that would do is we could then build up a longer term in-house program that maybe hits a couple of these other elements that we had originally wanted to hit, but also helps us figure out where we are spending the energy in developing that program to ensure that we're targeting and getting the right citizens that need the help. And then ultimately, instead of creating a whole new application process, we want to do as much similarity with the Arapahoe County process as possible so that people can fill out one form and it translates and copies from one program to another.
Good.
So that is, I believe that's, so here's a copy of that application form that that they have. Just as an example, you can see the information that that it looks for. But this is the kind of thing that we'd be mirroring instead of recreating the wheel. That we work with them.
Looks good.
So that's where we're at on the CAP program. And as our information gets out, we have a CAP page on the website, and we're going to have links to each one of these Arapahoe County programs based on whether you're a renter or whether you're a homeowner, and to allow people to, and what happens is they then apply for it, and then the funding is sent to the utility on behalf of that homeowner or citizen. So that is what we've been coming up with over the last 3 or 4 months as we've been sorting this out in partnership with Arapahoe County. And I'd be interested in hearing questions and thoughts.
Any comments from the board members? Everybody seems to be pretty quiet. I think you're on the track there. It looks good that you're using Arapahoe County's facilities to back into it a little there. That's a smart move. All right.
I think the mayor has a question.
Yeah, I think this is coming to council next week. I can't remember.
22nd for a study session.
22nd. Okay. Just so if you do have any, if you do have any input, let us know.
Okay. Next item, E, monthly utility billing. Again, Peter.
Okay, with me tonight as well on this, who's been working very, very hard on this, is additionally Jennifer Walker, who is our administrative services manager and manages the utility billing staff. And so she and Angela and her meter staff have been working really hard to change from our longstanding quarterly billing process to a monthly billing process. And that is something that we are rapidly working through right now in an effort to meet some deadlines that are rapidly approaching, which is April, which is when we need to begin our transition to monthly billing. So I just wanted to talk about what we're planning to do. So we've done a lot of work to understand how that transaction looks, because the city has 3 different quadrants that billing occurs in. And so if you think of the quarterly, the first month of the quarter was 1 quadrant that was billed. The second month was the second quadrant. And then the third month was the third quadrant. Well, now we're going to compress all that into 3 weeks in the month. And so we're taking what we would do over 3 successive months and now doing it over 3 successive weeks, which has required some change in how we read meters in terms of efficiency in the routes, as well as a change in how our billing software will accommodate that kind of work. And additionally in that, it'll be the first bills with the new water CIF, and that will show up specifically on the bill, as well as information that will link anybody to the customer assistance program that we just talked about. I think the most complex thing that we're dealing with right now is there's going to be a transition bill for everybody. So because water is billed in arrears based on usage, and sewer, stormwater, and concrete are billed the next month forward, when you compress this all from a quarterly state to a monthly state, you've got 2 months in one quadrant and 1 month going. And so we've done this analysis, and everybody is going to see some form of a transition bill, and then you'll get to your monthly bill, and so you may not get a full quarter's worth of the bill. You'll get 2 months of it, and then 1 month of sewer and concrete moving forward. It's been a lot of twisting our brain in knots, I would say, in terms of figuring out how this transition works. But I think we've got it figured out, and the dates that are going to that people will be seeing. In addition, we've been working on a mailer that will help describe this. And so this is not completely done yet, but this is almost done. And what you can see is this will go to every residence, and it'll talk about your quarterly bill is turning into a monthly. It'll talk about why we're going to do that, how it helps with your family budgeting. It helps you understand your water usage, helps you reduce water use and water waste if it makes sense. And then if you look to the right, there's 3 different quadrants, and it talks about the billing dates that they will experience from a quarterly perspective to now what will happen with them from a monthly perspective. So you can see quadrant one pretty much stays on the first of the month, whereas by quadrant 2, it's now moving to the May 7th and June 7th. So that's that second week. And then quadrant 3, there's the 14th as their new billing date. And so there's going to be that transition period where we're making up between the two to ensure that if you were to look over the span of the transition, everybody's paying the same amount through that period as they are supposed to. It's just what they see on a particular bill might be different during that period. We feel like this will help at least people understand when the transition bill will be for quadrant 1 will be April 1st, and then their new set in place monthly bill will be May 1st. We put a comparison of the 2 bills. So the old bill's on the left, the new bill's on the right, and highlighted a couple of the key things to remember, which is the water capital improvement fee at $15. And then really it's those usage numbers and days on the bottom that really indicate the difference between a quarterly and a monthly bill. And then you can see at the bottom there is there's a customer assistance program with a link that will link to the master page, and then people can then get to these other links that we talked about to Arapahoe County. Additionally, we put a icon to pay your bill online. We want to push more and more people to auto paying online, and we think that this is a good opportunity to get that out there and get people doing that. And then finally, because nobody really understands what quadrant they're in, this is a map of what quadrant people are in, and helps them understand where they fall as it relates to when they should see different bills. We are trying to do as much as we can to minimize the number of questions that are going to be generated through this process. However, we are anticipating a significant amount of questions. So in parallel, we are working on a frequently asked questions sheet that we can give to billing staff, we can give to utility staff and other front counter staff, we can give to council members, we can give to water and sewer board members, anybody that could potentially be asked a question on this, so that we can at least help you be informed if a resident says, hey, wait a minute, why is my bill so wonky this month and it doesn't make any sense and I can't figure out the math on it. So that's what we've been working on for the past few months on monthly billing transition. It's been a heavy lift on Jennifer and Angela's staff's part, and we're excited to initiate it and ideally get to the point where we're on a normal monthly schedule.
Anybody got any questions or discussion for Pieter? All right, next item.
It looks like John has a question.
Yeah. Just a couple. This is more. Is that communication piece already done, or is that just an early draft of it?
It is almost done. If you have something that you'd like to, it is not out yet. It's not final approved, but it is 98% done.
So I'll just share a couple quick reactions from a user standpoint. When the dates on the one page, you'd see like January 1, 21.
Hold on, let me go back to it. Hold on just a second. Oh, there we go.
There. It's hard to distinguish that 21 is meant to be the year.
Okay.
And so just a thought there, if you're using that format, I would generally do 2021 just to make it a little more, as opposed to trying not to distinguish that it's 2 different days of July or whatever. And then the other one's probably, for me, when you say the 3 quadrants, I keep looking for the 4th, but it's probably harder to do anything about that. But I don't.
You're not the only one on that one. When
Okay.
I said, I asked why we call them quadrants, and it's just, I said, can we call them sections? Can we call them something that doesn't indicate there should be a 4th?
Right.
And yeah, you're very astute in picking that up, because I had a similar question, and it's just the way it's always been done. I think once we get through this process, we might actually, from a nomenclature perspective, make a change, because I agree with you. It's a little bit confusing.
That's the mathematician in me. So I kept looking to see if quadrant 4 was going to be addressed on the back. So, all right, that was it. Thank you. Good stuff.
Thank you. Are there any concerns with the approach that we've laid out? I mean, I think that's more of where I'm looking for some feedback if we've missed anything.
I don't see anything.
Okay.
Okay.
I think that was it for that one.
Okay. The next one is F, sewer rate structure, connector districts.
Okay, so this is something that's been on our radar for quite some time as it relates to how we charge our connector districts. And in right now, and this is for treatment at South Platte Renew. So the city of Englewood has 11 connector districts that contract. So Southgate is an example of that. The contracts treatment through the city for South Platte Renew. And the way those contracts are set up is there hasn't really been there's not a significant multiplier on that. So as an outside city customer, the costs for their sewer is very similar to an inside city customer. The only surcharge that's built in is a 5% surcharge for infiltration and inflow, which is excess water that comes in through the pipes, through leaks in the pipes. And so much like we did on the water side, we took a step back and looked at it from an industry analysis perspective and an industry standard perspective to determine what is the appropriate multiplier, because there are administrative costs that aren't necessarily being captured. There are just liability of ownership that's not being accounted for that can be charged. And so we went through and we did this analysis, and essentially it's much like what we talked about on the water side. Is you have the inside city customers who are the owners of the system, and then you have who assume the risk of the investment, and then the outside city customers who are the non-owners, and they pay some kind of a surcharge to compensate the owners. So we did this analysis on the water side. That analysis yielded a multiplier of 1.4 because it's a much larger system. On this one, what we found is through our preliminary findings is that multiplier is right around 1.2. And so when you consider that the vast majority of our sewer customers through the city of Englewood come from the connector districts, there's an additional revenue amount that's pretty significant out of this. And what you can see is that the total additional revenue is about 2.8 million annually into the sewer fund of additional revenue that's for the 1.2. I think in terms of a difference, it's somewhere around 1.8-ish or 1.9 because of the we already charged for the 0.05. So we are working through the finalization of these numbers, but I wanted to give you this as an indication of what we're looking at here in terms of an industry accepted approach to recover costs that an owner assumes based on the significant investment. So what does that mean? So if you remember last fall, I showed you these graphs
right
that Stantec put together. And as we move forward, you can see the debt funding as you get into 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. We're doing a lot of debt funding to accomplish the projects for the sewer side. And if you remember our rate increase strategy over the next 10 years, it's generally about anywhere from 3% to 4.5%. We try to keep it pretty stable as a rate increase, but it assumes the use of a lot of debt to cover these projects and improvements that need to occur. When we incorporate this new revenue source from doing this analysis and charging this is what happens to that curve. You can see that our debt load actually goes down to what feels like a more manageable amount as opposed to a mostly debt load. And you can see the green part of the column is that new cash revenue that comes from those connector districts to help fund the improvements for the overall system. So, like I said, we're still in the finalization of this, but this is one of the main initiatives I know that has been a council priority for quite some time. And we wanted to make sure that we did the appropriate analysis on it to ensure that whatever we came up with was defensible if someone were to say, hey, wait a minute, why did you just increase our multiplier on this? Our next steps would be to essentially finalize this through we'd go to council on the 22nd. Again, this is one of the items on 22nd we'll be talking at a study session about. And then if this is the approach that council adopts, we would then move forward with an ordinance to change the multiplier in the ordinance itself. And the timing of this is such that we actually, if we complete this in April, it takes 30 days for an ordinance to become effective. By the end of May, we'll have this in place. And the connector district customers are billed on an annual basis, and that billing cycle starts in June. And so this gets us to the point where all that work that we did last year, we don't miss the window for ensuring that this analysis also is incorporated into what our connector districts see, so that it's comprehensively all customers of the system have been assessed the appropriate changes based on the analyses that we've been doing over the last 12 to 14 months. So that's where we're at on that one.
Do I see anybody wants to question or discuss it? Well, that looks like the end of the agenda here. Now we got any old business you want to bring up?
Chair, this John. Can I interrupt?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I was trying to get to the raise hand button. I'll be honest, I'm still trying to digest this concept. And so I don't question it. I only raise the point, Peter, that it is not intuitive. And the way, so I'm trying to think if there's a way to get a more, get that concept more like this is not the city, the owners trying to make profit off of the other customers. I don't believe.
That's correct.
Yeah. And you know, I've always, the way my understanding of the history of the development of the plant, years ago, there was pressure. I was under them. I may be wrong about this, but you know, I believe we were highly encouraged to create this plant that served this entire basin. And so I'm trying to, if you just tried to put in plain English why the ratepayers outside of the city limits really are fundamentally different, or what this fee is, because I also sit there and think, well, the rates, you know, the plant is not supported by taxpayer dollars as much as it is rates. So why their rate structure needs to be different. I just throw that out there, that this whole thing is just not, and we've been through this conversation before, but it's just still not intuitive to me. I don't have an answer. I don't think it's a problem. I just kind of share that feedback that I wish there was still a more digestible statement about why this is wholly appropriate. And even if we had, for instance, board members that were representing these other districts, that they too would be, oh yeah, this is totally equitable. So
a couple thoughts on that. So the first really easy one is we do the administrative billing for these customers, and so that's beyond the original scope of you know, just being inside and billing our city customers, and so yeah, it's recouping part of that cost. That one I get. The other thing is so Southgate, for example, Southgate could say, and Southgate's 100,000 people. It's a significant part of our service area, and they could say, you know what, we're tired of South Platte Renew. We're tired of working with the city of Englewood. We're going to go build our own plant. And so they could go and they have no investment. They have no ownership of that plant. And so they could say, we're going to pull out and build our own plant. And then the city of Englewood citizens are left with the investment and the cost of that investment into the future and that risk of that. And so that's part of what the water and wastewater industry has accounted for in these methodologies to help protect the original investors in the actual asset. Carol, did I miss anything else? I mean, other things that might help explain that?
No, you've covered the main points of this type of an approach to rate making. And it is not uncommon across the United States for instances where a city or even a joint city group has to serve outside their jurisdictions. So, or provides that service to those outside the jurisdiction. So it's essentially compensating the city for the risk incurred in service to those customers.
And that example was very, very helpful. The thing that would surprise me is the suggestion that Southgate has a choice in this matter in terms of participating. Again, I was kind of under the impression that have a geographic boundary and there was no choice to be in or out. But if that's not the case, then it does begin to make a lot more sense. Yeah,
I think functionally you're right. It's hard to it'd be hard for Southgate to say, go to the state and say, hey, we're going to build a new plant because we don't like this plant that we're a partner to. But it is not impossible that that could occur. And that's what that accounts for that risk. There's also the return on investment piece that the owners can get some return on that investment, since the owners are taking the risk of building such a large infrastructure to serve beyond the customer base. We have citizens in the city of Englewood that are served by other districts. This South Englewood Sanitation District is a perfect example of this. So the southern third of the city of Englewood is served by South Englewood Sanitation District, and full disclosure, I live in that district too. So I have to remember to say that every time. But right now the multiplier that they charge is 1.55, and so whatever the city's treatment cost is, they then multiply it by 1.55 and charge that for their collection system cost. So we as citizens still pay for the city cost at 100%, but then to pay for the collection system that they provide service on, it's 1.55%. And you may be saying that seems large. And that, I think, is a long-standing question that many people in the southern part of Englewood have. I can tell you that's something that's another thing that we are looking into, because of that methodology. We're trying to understand how they've arrived at that methodology. But there's another example of where that's done.
But that sounds different. That sounds like any district can choose to take rates even higher, right? This is we're affecting their input costs, so to speak. So I'm not sure I'm following that parallel. I guess when you get to the risk of ownership, the bottom line, here would have been my impression. The ratepayers of this system will have to incur whatever the costs are to keep this system running. So in terms of a risk of ownership, I guess it's still fundamentally, every ratepayer in this basin, I think, still has this plant has to serve that whole basin. These are captive customers. And so even then, when you talk about, I get it if we talk about an entity had a right to pull out, because then they're no longer captive customers. But if they are all captive customers and we must treat our water, and we must, as you know, our rates are going to cover the cost of doing that, it's still weird to be able to draw that distinction between the user on one side of the line versus the other. And again, I really appreciate this and the industry issues. I'm just merely sharing. It doesn't fully sink in my head, and the more you have to be able to defend and communicate this, I just keep pushing for a clearer story that goes with it.
Here's one other thing, and I know Board Member Roth has a question too, and so I want to get to that too. One other example is the only owners of the plant are Englewood and Littleton. So if the EPA comes in and says, you are in violation, here's your consent decree, here's whatever, the connector districts are customers of Englewood. And so their response would be, well, it's your system, so go figure it out.
Right.
And so that's where I think there's that inherent risk of ownership that is also something that's incurred by the actual owners of Englewood and the owners of Littleton. And that's part of what this captures as well.
Whatever that is, so would have to be pushed back to the ratepayer. So the question in that example would be, whatever thing you've got to fix, would we be able to, would it literally be the inside city people, ratepayers, that are going to pay that? Or ultimately, will it be in the rates of all the ratepayers? I mean,
It's more the responsibility, I guess, is what I'm getting at. And I mean, the true responsibility is in the owner. And that's part of what the industry has acknowledged is something that has a monetary value. And again, we're following industry standards on this. And I get it, you're right. I think the more we get into the nuance of it is definitely more complex. We didn't even get into the weighted average cost of capital, which is part of what goes into this analysis. From a very financial perspective.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I don't think I've answered. So I'm sorry I haven't answered I don't think I've answered your question.
And it's all right. I'm just sharing for whatever value there is in my inability to completely grasp it. But I know Don wants to speak, so I'll be quiet.
Yeah, I'm good. I got my question answered.
Okay. Well, thank you for the discussion on that. I think that really helps. And you know what I'll do is I'll go back with Carol and the team to talk about maybe some better bullet points on this. Carol, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, Peter, I just wanted to confirm that it would, maybe the board members would like us to pull together a better slide that describes the basis for this charge. We can do that.
Yeah, I think that would, I personally would appreciate that. And again, I will share, the way, you know, with my belief, my understanding that the ratepayers must pay the cost of running the system. And I'm not ever seeing that there's a risk of winning or losing. It's just, that's what rates are. It makes it hard to make that distinction. I mean, it seems like the cost of capital is in fact borne by all the ratepayers. So that anything that helps me understand that better, I certainly would appreciate.
Okay. We can certainly do that.
Okay. Well, do we have any old business, Peter?
No old business.
How about your staff? Anything from the staff?
I think we've hit 6:30 today. I think we've covered quite a bit.
I think we have too. Unless anybody on the board has anything to comment about and have no objection to an adjournment, we will adjourn this meeting and thank you very much. And be careful for the Easter bunny when he's around with the chocolate eggs now.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks. Good night.